In this video, I'm going to show you how to get a great bass guitar tone, one that is perfect for rock and country music especially. Now, in these genres, it's usually necessary to have a bass sound that is thick and deep, but sometimes you also want one that cuts through the mix as well. This is especially important when it's a big arrangement. It's got lots of guitars, there's a lot going on. You want to be able to hear the bass, you want it to poke through the mix. This is also a really common problem I hear in amateur mixers, in up-and-coming bands that cannot get their bass to cut through on smaller speakers. When they're listening on things like phones, laptops, and just small Bluetooth speakers in general, and the bass just doesn't cut through. I'm going to show you how you can achieve that. Now, there are a few ways that you can achieve this kind of bass sound in your mix. I'm going to show you my favorite way, the way that works for me, but I'll also talk you through some alternative options as well, and then you can decide which one is the best one for you. Okay, so let's start off by taking a look at this session. This is a pop rock song. It's a very typical kind of pop rock mix, and the bass really cuts through. You can see the bass tracks that I've got here highlighted in blue. I'm going to play a section for you, and then we'll break it down and we'll talk about what's going on. Okay, so as you can hear, the bass is really filling out that mix. The low end is huge and fat, but it's really tight and under controlled. But also the bass cuts through as well, especially in the verse. So let's take a look at the bass tracks that are in this song. So the first one is just a DI track, just a normal DI bass, but I have treated it quite heavily in the mix. The second is an amp track, so it's just a mic in front of an amp. This is a Ribbon VR1 mic from SE. And then there's also this track here, and this is the key for me. This is the Bass 57 Tweeter. Now, the amp that I used to record this was an Ashdown ABM 600 through an Ashdown 6x10 cab. The great thing about that cabinet is that it's got 6 10-inch speakers, which sound absolutely incredible, but there's also a tweeter in the middle. That tweeter has such incredible tight mids, and when we recorded it, I put an SM57 mic right in front of that tweeter, along with the main VR1 Ribbon mic that was on the 10-inch speaker. So what we're hearing is a blend of those three sounds. So let's start with just the main mic'd up amp sound. We've got a very tiny little bit of processing on this track. We're adding a little bit of 2K. That's just going to poke the mid-range out a little bit. And other than that, there's just some compression. This is a very slow compressor. It's really fat. It's kind of a little bit like an LA2A. And we're just taking off around 5 to 7 dB just to really pin the bass down and keep it under control. This mic, as you'll hear in a minute, sounds really fat. This is where that big blooming low end is coming from. Let's take a listen. So that's a great starting point for the bass sound, but there's no way that you would hear that on laptop speakers or on a phone, because it's mostly just low end. There's a little bit of mids cutting through, but nowhere near enough. So we need to supplement that with something. Now, the DI was processed quite heavily on the way in. So I ran it through a preamp that was really cranked to get the distorted sound. And then in the mix, I'm just adding a little bit of EQ. As you can see, I'm taking a lot of top end off, just to tame some of that harshness that was added by pushing it through the preamp. And then we're compressing it. We're compressing it with the Cubase stock tube compressor, and it's getting quite a hit. We're getting sort of around 10 to 12 dB of compression, again, to really pin it in place. Let's take a listen to what that sounds like on its own. Now put that with the amp sound that we heard a minute ago. You can hear how much mid-range that is already adding. If we just take that DI track out, that's adding so much growl and so much aggression to the bass track. That is going to really, really help it cut through. Now, at this point, we have a really, really good, solid, tight bass track that absolutely could work in a track. However, I added that extra microphone. So this is the SM57 that was on the tweeter of the cabinet. Now we have got a little bit of treatment. I've got FabFilter Pro Q3, just dipping a little bit around 1K that was just poking a little bit too much for me, and also a little bit of a high shelf as well, just to tame some of the fizziness and the harshness that I was getting. We're then going into the Slate mix rack. We're adding a bunch of 2K. Again, that's going to help the mid-range come out. Now, although this is a tweeter, it had some nice lows. It didn't go super deep, but it did have some punch in the lows, and I'm bringing that out just by adding a touch of 100 hertz. That is then going into this preamp that is adding some distortion and saturation, and because we've boosted some of the mids, we're going to get some distortion around that kind of frequency area that's going to help it poke out even more. And then finally, we're going into a distressor. This is on 10:1, it's on the opto setting, and it's compressing a lot, again, to kind of pin everything down and hold it where it needs to be so that it's tight and it's controlled and we're not getting lots and lots of random notes poking out. Let's take a listen. So I feel like that is quite a good blend of both the other guitar tracks. It doesn't go as low as the main amp, but it's got some nice punch in the lows, but then we have that really aggressive mid-range. When we mix that into the other two tracks, it's just going to help the overall bass sound. So let's take a listen to that now. Now, the final thing I will mention is we also have this synth bass. Now, this is not a bass guitar, but I felt like I just wanted to fill the low end out even more in the choruses. So this is just a really simple synth bass from Omnisphere. It only comes in the choruses, and it's a hell of a lot of sub. Take a listen. So you get the kind of little pluck in the mid-range when the note hits, but other than that, it's just, there's just so much sub from that. I'm doing virtually no processing to that as well, just adding some console saturation, and then just sitting that just underneath the bass. It just helps fill the chorus out when the chorus comes in. So let's put that into the track and listen to it in context. I'm going to mute the vocals for this just so that you can focus and you can hear the bass a little bit more. So there we have it. Even if you're listening on a phone or on a laptop, you're going to hear that bass cutting through, and that is a really good way to achieve it. Now, if you are a Kemper owner I actually profiled this exact amp, and I also profiled it with microphones on the main speaker, but I also profiled that tweeter as well. Now these profiles are available, you can download them, just go to adam-fiasco.com/Kemper Profiles. The link is in the description below. They're super cheap, super affordable, and there's so many different microphone options. It's such a versatile amp as well, and you will be able to use this exact same configuration. I've got mine loaded into the Kemper. It finds its way onto pretty much most rock and country projects that I do. Now, as I said at the start of the video, this can work really, really well for country music as well. So I'm just going to show you a small part of a session where I used exactly the same process on a country song. So these are the 3 bass tracks right here. The only difference is that instead of using the VR1 ribbon mic on the main speaker, I used a U87 condenser. That's also profiled in the Kemper Profiles as well. You can get that exact same tone. We also have the 57 tweeter, again, that is in the Kemper Profiles. And there's also the DI. The treatment is virtually the same. We're doing the same kind of thing, boosting around sort of 2K, adding a little bit of distortion to the 57 and the DI, and then just blending that in with the bass amp. There was no synth track on this one. I felt like it just didn't need it. Take a listen.
With this tide, and maybe you'll be my moon. Been down now, I've lost my way, but now I'm here to stay. Hold on tight for tonight, I'll be whatever you need. Take my hand, don't look back, I'll keep you safe, 'cause you'll see when life gets in your face. You know I'm here to stay.
Now, at this point, if you're a songwriter, it would make a ton of sense for you to download my songwriter's checklist. Writing music absolutely is an art, but our listeners expect to hear certain things, and they expect our music to make them feel a certain way. So it's really, really important that we don't miss the mark, because a good arrangement is what is going to make our listeners want to hit the repeat button over and over again. So despite it being an art, there is still a process, and there's still certain things that we have to go through every single time to make sure our song connects with our audience in the right way. And that structure is on this checklist. It's the exact same checklist that I go through with every single one of my production clients. Even before we hit the record button, we want to make sure that the song, the arrangement, everything is absolutely as it should be, and it sounds the best that it possibly can. It's completely free to download, and the link is in the description below.